The American Civil War was one of the most complex and brutal conflicts in U.S. history, but it also became a proving ground for some of the most brilliant military minds of the 19th century. From daring flanking movements to deceptive strategies and bold offensives, both Union and Confederate commanders executed maneuvers that continue to be studied in military academies around the world. Here's a look at some of the most brilliant military maneuvers of the Civil War, and how they changed the course of the conflict. 1. Jackson's flank march at Chancellorsville, May 1863. Perhaps the most legendary maneuver of the war, General Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson executed a 12-mile secret march through dense Virginia wilderness to strike the Union right flank at Chancellorsville. Under the cover of forest and guided by local knowledge, Jackson's 28,000-man force caught Union General Joseph Hooker completely off guard. The result was a crushing Confederate victory, despite the Union's superior numbers. Tragically, Jackson was mortally wounded by friendly fire after the battle, but his maneuver remains a textbook example of tactical surprise and the effective use of terrain. 2. Grant's Vicksburg Campaign, April–July 1863. General Ulysses S. Grant's campaign to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a masterclass in operational maneuver warfare. After multiple failed attempts to take the city from the north, Grant boldly marched his army down the western bank of the Mississippi River, crossed south of Vicksburg and turned inland. Grant's forces won a string of battles, Port Gibson, Raymond, Jackson, Champion Hill, and then surrounded Vicksburg in a siege that eventually forced its surrender. The campaign cut the Confederacy in two and gave the Union full control of the Mississippi River, fulfilling a key objective of the Anaconda Plan. 3. Sherman's March to the Sea, November–December 1864. General William Tecumseh Sherman launched one of the most audacious maneuvers of the war when he marched 60,000 Union troops from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, through the heart of the Confederacy, with no supply line. Sherman's forces lived off the land, destroyed railroads, burned crops, and broke Southern morale in what became a brutal form of total war. The march not only devastated the South's capacity to wage war but also showcased how mobility and psychological warfare could have strategic effects far beyond the battlefield. 4. Lee's counteroffensive at 2nd Manassas, August 1862. General Robert E. Lee, despite being outnumbered, launched a brilliant counteroffensive during the Second Battle of Manassas, Bull Run. He split his army, sending Jackson to seize the Union supply depot at Manassas Junction. Jackson entrenched his position, forcing Union General John Pope to attack, unaware that Longstreet's corps was secretly closing in. Once Pope committed his forces, Longstreet's men launched a devastating flank attack that crushed the Union Army. The maneuver not only pushed Union forces out of northern Virginia but also opened the door for Lee's first invasion of the North. 5. The Tullahoma Campaign, June–July 1863. Often overshadowed by Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the Tullahoma Campaign, led by Union General William Rosecrans, was a masterclass in maneuver warfare with minimal bloodshed. Rosecrans outmaneuvered Confederate General Braxton Bragg in Tennessee, using deception, feints, and flanking movements to force Bragg's army to retreat without a major battle. Rosecrans advanced 80 miles and captured a key region with very few casualties, a rare achievement in a war usually marked by brutal frontal assaults. 6. The capture of New Orleans, April 1862. Union Admiral David Farragut executed a daring naval maneuver when he ran his fleet past the heavily fortified Confederate defenses at Forts Jackson and St. Philip to capture New Orleans, one of the South's most vital ports. With bold night movements and calculated risk, Farragut's fleet bombarded the forts and bypassed them under cover of darkness and smokescreens. The swift capture of New Orleans crippled Confederate trade and control over the lower Mississippi River. 7. The Battle of Fort Donelson, February 1862. Another early example of Grant's boldness, the Battle of Fort Donelson marked the first major Union victory of the war. Grant surrounded the Confederate fort in Tennessee and launched coordinated assaults with naval gunboats and infantry. When the Confederate generals attempted to break out, Grant counterattacked and forced their surrender. His demand for unconditional and immediate surrender earned him national fame and gave the Union a critical foothold in the Western theater. Conclusion: strategy amid chaos. The Civil War was not just a war of attrition, it was also a war of wits. These maneuvers showcased the ability of Union and Confederate commanders to think beyond brute force, employing deception, speed, terrain, and surprise to outmaneuver their opponents. In a conflict often remembered for its bloodshed, these moments of tactical brilliance remind us that intelligence and strategy were just as decisive as courage on the battlefield.